Hello and very welcome to 1716 of the series, and we will continue today with Wittgenstein's Rethinking the Inner by Paul Johnston. It's a cornucopia of brilliant realizations piling up on each other. And we've now presently been looking into the complexity of the inner. Something that disappears out of sight when we venture too far into the vestiges of inner and outer. Page 165 in the chapter, The Complexity of the Inner. The second paragraph, Wittgenstein drew up several plans for the treatment of psychological concepts, and the best way to summarize the chapter is to quote one of them. The following: ought I to call the whole field of the psychological that of experience, and so all psychological verbs of experience, or concepts of experience, their characteristic is this, that the third person, but not their first person, is stated on grounds of observation. That observation is a observation of behavior. A subclass of concepts of experience is formed by the concept of undergoings, erfaringsbegriffet. undergoings have duration, and of course they may run on uniformly or non-uniformly. They have intensity. They are not characters of thought. Images are undergoings. Examples: sadness, joy, grief, delight. And one might distinguish between directed emotions and undirected emotions. An emotion has duration. Just give me a second here. The main difference is that of duration. They may run on uniformly or non-uniformly. They have intensity. They are not characters of thought. Images are undergoings. A subclass of undergoings are impressions. impressions have spatial and temporal relations to one another. There are blend impressions, that is, blends of smells, colors, sounds. Emotions are experiences, but not undergoings. Examples: sadness, joy, grief, delight. And one might distinguish between directed emotions and undirected emotions. An emotion has duration. It has characteristics, undergoings, and thoughts. It has a characteristic expression which one would use in miming it. Talking under certain circumstances and whatever else corresponds to that is thinking. emotions color thoughts. One subclass of experiences is the forms of conviction. Belief, certainty, doubt, etc. Their expression is an expression of thought. They are not colorings of thought. The directed emotions might also be called attitudes. Surprise and fright are attitudes too, and so are admiration and enjoyment. This plan is neither exhaustive nor definitive, but it gives some idea of the complexity of the inner and the sort of distinctions which structure the grammar of its various concepts. If we now ask why we are interested in the inner, we can see that we have many types of interests in it. That someone has a particular intention, has a very different interest from the fact that she has a particular sensation, while the fact that she is in pain has another type of interest altogether. So these experiences have different aspects to them, which makes them different, and I'd say unique as well. And one interesting feature here is directed emotion in contrast to undirected emotion. And there is a coloring in some instances coming from emotion and going into thought. And a particular subclass is conviction, belief, certainty, doubt, etc. That also has their typical properties that are absolutely different from the others. They are in sharp contrast to them. And I like the idea that directed emotions also can be called attitudes. That is something that we've gone into before. That attitude towards is a certain form of direction that is already established. It leads somewhere. It has a certain directionality. And it's, of course, far from exhaustive, but it still has a possibility to pointing to some of the incredible complexities that are sort of out of the way of understanding because of that crude, sharp division between inner as in hidden, and the outer that also in that case becomes obscured, not very clear, not transparent to our understanding. It hides the division inner and outer in this crude form, hides, makes access very hard. And it's also this differentiation that someone can have a particular intention, an attitude towards, as mentioned before, and that attitude towards doesn't have this checking status, is not dependent on circumstances to make it either true or false. It has none of those characteristics at all. Instead, it's a true directedness coming from an interesting before, which we don't know, but I direct my attitude. They are soulful, for instance, as we mentioned a couple of episodes ago. It's a whole other attitude. And I continue, that someone has a particular intention, has a very different interest from the fact that she has a particular sensation, while the fact that she is in pain has another type of interest altogether. However, these points still leave one fundamental issue unexplored. For why do we use the inner outer picture at all? What is the real significance of the picture which lies at the very heart of our lives? These questions will be looked at in the next chapter. What will be looked into here is, from where does the picture, the idea of an innerness that's hidden and an outerness that is, so to speak, obscured by these tendencies of division. And as you sure know by this, is that there is a clear image somewhere. It's not clear maybe, but there is somewhere a picture that captivated us and led to this ruling or hypnotism of the picture that is behind everything and sort of rules it. And it enforces the idea of the division. But truly there is the picture, not words or reasoning, that is behind all of it. That could be, I'd say, one of the biggest surprises. One of the things that most definitely is least expected. Not something that you naturally would assume to be the case. You think that, and we mentioned that before, just the tendency to see thinking as words further distances us to the understanding that there is a picture underneath all of it. And this is one of the reasons why it's so important to be able to enter this prohibited zone of the picture. So what Wittgenstein wants to do with this is not only to easen up the division between inner and outer. But also to show further that there is a innerness of a picture, or underneathness of a picture. So in a way he swats two flies in one hit. Let's have a look-see at this chapter 6, the inner-outer picture. This is page 167 for the ones who's following the book. And I don't remember if I mentioned this. This is also accessible as a PDF. So you can print it out, or you can read it from a Kindle device or something similar. And I'll read first the quote here. The characteristic of the mental seems to be that one has to guess at it according to, listen now, to the outer in others, and knows it only in one's own case. But when, through more careful thought, this opinion goes up in smoke, what turns out to be the case is not that the inner is something outer. But listen now, but that inner and outer no longer qualifies as evidence. Inner evidence means nothing. And therefore, neither does outer evidence. And the magnitude of this quote, which is finished now, is incredible. Speak about swatting 2 flies in one go. We've been discussing this mostly in the terms of inner evidence as a start of thinking, decision, that words or speech is the absolute starting point of all thinking. It's at the bottom, and it is a sort of evidence for that thinking has been going on. And we also mentioned earlier emotions. That the physical expressions can be sort of token, that is evidence for the emotions. That is a sort of outer evidence for something hiddenly felt. And outer evidence is also, as we haven't mentioned so much, but important for empiricism, epistemology, where thought propositions, things that we've been thinking, become confirmed by outer evidence, as in the example of the Gettier problem that I mentioned a couple of times ago. that seems to be so problematic for us. We see smoke, but it turns out that that smoke is coming from a nearby place where there are firing up leaves, but it's still the fact that our house is on fire. We need an evidence for our knowledge, we think. And behind that is the idea of the pertinence, of the importance of inner versus outer. In the preceding chapters, I continue here, page 167, we have criticized the conception of the inner as a mysterious, hidden entity. And in particular, we have emphasized the link between the inner and the outer. For talk of inner states only makes sense when there are several criteria for those states. Having made these points, several important questions remain. For if the inner-outer picture is so confusing, why do we use it? The picture cannot simply be dismissed as misleading. For reference to it, it's part of the grammar, listen up, of our psychological concepts. Thus, until we can clarify its significance, our account is lacking a fundamental element. A second difficulty related to this one is the clash between Wittgenstein's attempts to demystify the inner and our sense that it is genuinely is mysterious. Even people we know may suddenly act in ways which makes us feel we do not really know them at all. Similarly, in the midst of everyday activity, we may suddenly be struck by the otherness of other people and wonder at the simple fact that there are consciousnesses other than our own. On such occasions, the idea that the inner is hidden seems an undeniable truth. Indeed, insofar as we are often uncertain what others are thinking or feeling, we might well be said to experience the hiddenness of the inner every day. So, what should we make of this? Is the inner hidden? And if so, in what sense? So the hiddenness is something that is lurking, so to speak, in everyday experience, and we get infatuated by it. It becomes a stronghold in our experience that there are features of the world that are quite massively under the surface and possibly even unreachable for our understanding. And it becomes an abyss of mysterious features. And this is This is one of the reasons why we often use the word the inner is causative, or its counterpole, the outer, is evidential for things that has happened, or they are the causes that lead to different things. And I will not go into that specific part of the understanding, but one of the reasons why we think it's hidden, it's deeply ingrained in the grammar of first person versus third person. That grammatical sense. For reasons that are purely of use, it gives at a very quick glance the idea that these things are hidden in some way. And as in the examples of, we sometimes get deeply surprised by the behaviors of others. They just surprises us, like their views, their actions are coming completely out of the blue, from nowhere. And they strike us as shocking, or we get to the very core of our soul surprised. Those indications or pushes into the direction of hiddenness are important to understand. The idea is that you will see this yourself. It is a sort of exploration of sorts. Wittgenstein's way of reasoning is not the argumentative, normal way, because rather he opens up a whole new area of investigation. I like the word. And it's true. It's one almost, at times one feels like a detective, but often it demands a high degree of intensive thinking. To really get into this fundamental picture, or discover it and see, these were the reasons I had the picture. It starts there. Or you start to think, isn't that odd? And little by little, the picture is developing. And in an argument with someone, it would be impossible to convince them that the inner in people is not hidden. All the good reasons, propositions, arguments rather, are all that already out there to prove the fact of the inner by using evidence. Evidential confirmation that could stop the investigation that the most obvious reason, if I continue now, page 168, the most obvious reason for believing in the inner to be hidden is the uncertainty that affects our judgments about the inner states of others. When, for example, someone seems to be in pain, they are suffering, they are complaining, they are making the just gestures, grimaces, facial expressions and sounds, but still they were not suffering from any pain at all. Of course, such circumstances are bound to lead us in the direction of thinking the inner to be deeply hidden. Time to finish off just when it's as the most interesting. So we're not just now going into, we've been slowly rediscovering our senses and what is the problem with the inner. And very important, we start looking at thoughts, because the inner as evidence usually takes the idea that thoughts are inner speech or images of some sort as evidence for thinking going on. And the other side, as I mentioned, is evidence for things that has happened. And then it's a helper here, chapter 4, the musicality of language, to sort of soften up sign signified. See that language doesn't have, or need a particular reason for its existence or for its right to express. Doesn't come from, I think, in linguistics that was often called intention, also something deeply hidden, as deep as possibly could be, and the equally, as I understand now, I never saw it as mysterious before, but that extension is quite as mysterious as intention. Language has its very own heaviness and decidedness to it. Its capacity to tell, to be understood, and to express, almost like a concerto or music. Then we went to the massive complexity of the inner. That is also an invitation to open up the interest in the inner. See, it's vastly more complicated than some simple evidence giver. With no particular features more than giving evidence for different things. Being behind that very idea hides all the magnificent features in the inner, and the complexity is vast. The different dispositions are incredibly apart from each other, and ones have duration, some have duration, some have aspects of being towards a directionality, and yet others colors thinking, like certain emotions like sadness, joy. And all of a sudden you see, this is so much more complex and interesting than just being evidence and hidden and impossible to reach into. To make it even more enticing, this also opens up the outer, the outside, as being more than only evidence for our experience, being so much more, so incredibly more rewarding. So there is opening up in both directions. I say thank you very much for this go through. I hope you found it interesting. I wish you a very pleasant day, afternoon, evening, morning, night, wherever you are. Bye bye for now. Do take care.